to introduce our panelists, we have Sagal Duale. She is a Senior Director of the Canadian Women's Foundation. We have Jen Miller, the Director of Mission and Money from the Atkinson Foundation. Michelle Baldwin, she is a Senior Advisor of the Community Foundations of Canada. We have Najeri Lati. She is the manager of the community investment of Van City. We have Tracy Robertson, partnerships of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Sally Damaki, policy analyst of ESDC. Artie Freeman, CEO of Definity Insurance Foundation. I have a couple of questions for the panelists. So for Sagal, the Canadian Women's Foundation has led advancing gender equality across a number of impact areas over the last few decades. What progress has been made and inspires your work?
I think that's a big question, but I'll try my best. I think the foundation has really been, for the last 30 years, been working towards gender justice and gender equality, and some really good progress has been made, absolutely, in terms of where Canada is globally relative to other countries. We are usually in the top 10, top 20 list based on different factors. We lead the United States, and we only kind of lag behind a few countries in Western Europe and Nordic countries. But when we look at the intersectionalities around race, economic status and so on, it's not necessarily the case. And I'll come back to that. But in terms of kind of that broader, progress and what's being made, I think workforce participation for women, we have more women and non-binary people in political leadership roles. They're in positions of advocacy to make those structural changes. And I think what's more promising now is the federal government's investment in the national childcare system, which goes a long way to supporting gender equality. So I think we've been encouraged by this momentum and investment from the federal government towards things like the National Action Plan on ending gender-based violence, the emergency pandemic funding to support frontline service organizations like shelters and transition homes. And so we're seeing this movement towards this application towards using more gender-based analysis when it comes to policymaking and budgeting at that level. And a lot of this progress, I think, is thanks to the decades and decades, well before me, of women's organizations and advocacy across the country. And I think what's interesting is that in just the last couple of years of the pandemic, the urgency of this social change to address gender equality it's kind of inspiring to me. And we already know that the crisis of the pandemic disproportionately impacted diverse women, Black women, First Nations, BT, and Inuit women. And so at one point during the pandemic, the women's workforce participation went down the lowest point it has been in 3 decades, right? And so strengthening gender isn't just the right thing to do. It's really the needed thing to do in order to have economic recovery in Canada. And so even when we consider, I think, future crises like climate change that's on the horizon, we need to have the right funding, stabilizing supports in place in order for us to even have a chance with gender parity and equality with these crises and shocks. And so I think further progress won't happen without taking a truly intersectional approach. We know that gender equity challenges are more pronounced with Black women, racialized women, newcomers, migrant women, people with no status, living with disabilities. And so continuing to address kind of these ongoing systemic changes is what drives, I think, a lot of folks here at the Canadian Women's Foundation and a lot of organizations that we fund. It's that urgency to continue to address those kind of root issues when it comes to gender equality and gender justice.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Sally, in your opinion, how do we establish ecosystems that are grounded in a sense of belonging?
Joining from the NCD territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, also known as Montreal. Really excited to be here alongside lots of folks I've worked with, including my former boss, Sagal. Always a pleasure to share space with her. So in terms of creating that sense of belonging, I think it's really multifaceted. And there's actually a really great document that was put together by the Canadian Women's Foundation, Community Foundations of Canada, and the Equality Fund, which is called Principles for Feminist Funding, which I really encourage folks to take a look at if you haven't already. And I think it really does a good job of capturing some of the really meaningful ways to truly create that sense of belonging in communities in our ecosystem as well. And those include pursuing truth, reconciliation, and decolonizing practices, which of course have and should be at the center of everything we do. There's also reflecting and acting on power imbalances, which we hear a lot about, but what does that truly mean? And are we truly actioning that? And also not being afraid to be challenged on our own practices. So when we hold that power, how are we actually receiving this input, insight? How are we being challenged? And are we comfortable getting uncomfortable? That's, I think, a really important point that we really have to reflect on.
Thank you, Sally. Najeri, Van City has led remarkable work in community investment. Where do you currently see the most progress, and what inspires you most about your work?
I am just really coming to you right now from Surrey, British Columbia, and this is the territory of the Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Semiahmoo First Nations. And on such a beautiful day like it is here today, it's really sunny. How grateful I am as a settler to really be welcome to this land and just be given an opportunity even to be here to talk to you guys about Van City. So I've been with Van City for around 25 years, and I'm really in community investment for the last 10 years. And Van City is a financial cooperative. So one of our principle number 7 is all about giving back to the community. And I'm really excited this year that we have actually a new strategy. And our new strategy is really grounded in our organizational values and principles. And some of our we have 3 main priorities. Because first of all, Van City's commitment to building a clean and fair world. We have 3 priorities, which are around increased financial resilience. So just ensuring that everybody has access to financial services and people feel confident about their savings. And also during these times that are really, really difficult, that people have feel they are resilient during these times. And also reduce carbon emissions. So Van City signed a commitment to, by 2040, to be carbon neutral. So we really are looking at the way we operate and ensuring that we are decarbonizing our businesses and looking at home energy retrofits. And also reconciliation and racial justice. And so really having a comprehensive Indigenous banking strategy and incorporating anti-racist principles, practices, and approaches in all that we do. So one of the exciting things that happened last year is that we were able to hire an external consultant, and he knows who he is. It was Victor through SETSI. And really we were able to review our shared success program. So shared success is the 30% that we give back to community in our membership every year. Those are our net profits. This year, it was $17 million. And so we were able to look at that program through an anti-racism and anti-colonial lens. And through that, we were able to recognize that we have, my internet is saying it's unstable. So if I start freezing, just let me know. And so we were able to actually sit back and look back and see how exactly do we want to move forward with the way we are doing our granting. So what we are doing right now is we are shifting towards more larger multi-year investments. We had never really done that, but we have been very, very deliberate in the way we are approaching our granting and ensuring that nonprofits feel that they are confident in being able to operate for the next 3 years because we have done a multi-year investment in them. And this actually has been across all our community investment funding staff. They've been given the authority to do that, which is actually a first in our department. We've also been incorporating the trust-based philanthropy and also funding operational, which a lot of organizations don't do. So we are funding operational, we are funding payroll, we're funding the things that when you get the big grants from the government, the things that they restrict you from getting. So we will look at whatever funding you have, and we will fund what you have restricted from funding. And we are also testing some social innovation, social finance innovation, which I'll talk about doing a granting. So from responsive to more of the proactive and strategic grants. So the proactive grants are based on our relationship with the community partner. So I know because Van City is based in British Columbia, most of our granting does go in, is funded in BC. But we do have the VCIB, the Van City Community Investment Bank, that has opened up granting all over the country. So we are opening to supporting community partners across the country. So pretty much excited about the direction we are going. We are really trying to put together some really good data so that we can understand the impact of what we're doing, especially with equity deserving communities. Yeah, so quite excited about the way we are moving, the direction we are going.
Thank you. So we have a question for Tracy. In your years of work as a funder, what are some of the best practices that inspire you most?
Thanks so much for the question, and thanks SETSI for the invitation to participate in this panel. It's really exciting. I'm calling from London, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawamet peoples. Yeah, question. It made me think actually about that. I know this is a funders panel, but I don't really think of myself as a funder. I think that's what makes it more successful. I think some of the approaches and that I think about is more a mindset. Think about it more as a community builder and someone who wants to work a little bit more holistically and organically, and work with communities to look for the opportunities to engage. I start to think about, how you broaden your perspective over the years, and how, because it's been almost 30 years in this field, and think about how you can learn from communities and others, and not assume that we know how we're doing things. So I really got much more passionate about unlocking the power of capital and moving it and sharing the power with communities. I think a couple of things that kind of influenced my work or the work in community. One was around I love to reframe and redesign and reimagine. And I think that's what we always need to challenge ourselves with, and not the status quo. And so I've always been really inspired by the design thinking kind of approach, that human-centered design. But the reason that I was interested in that work and brought it into community work was because it was about really experimenting and iterating on an idea and really starting to challenge our thinking. But it was also around bringing other perspectives in the conversation. So it's not just about what we think, what we typically think, but bringing those artists around and the scientists and the ethnographers around to really look at solving a problem or supporting a change in that kind of work. And the other thing that inspired me about that work, though, is how we never have this R&D experimentation money in the nonprofit sector. So it was like the corporate sector tended to have that. We never did. And so it was really hard to get. And so this R&D kind of approach was fascinating and to me. I think there's a couple of other ways of that I thought of in terms of practice. And one is, of course, collaborations and networks, and thinking as a collaborator and working with others in order to make that change, and especially around funders, and almost sharing that even looking at a shared perspective and shared goal to advance. That's something that I think we all tend to work towards. And I know we do a lot of the collaboration work and network work with others, regardless of if they were funders or whether they're nonprofits, etc. But I think there's a lot of learnings around the collaborations. I think it's really difficult work, and it's not so easy. And just the last thing that started to shift my thinking more recently, and that was in the participatory investment area. I know we talk about trust-based philanthropy a lot, and we need to be engaged in that work. But I think this is more about action and not just talking. And it's really about shifting power and impact investing and participatory investing practices by reimagining governance structure to give decision-making power to those who are closest to the issues it seeks to address, and really looking at and real dismantling participatory funding structures. We're just beginning to work with other funders right now to really challenge our assumptions and co-create a vision for participatory investing. One of those examples is the Boston Impact Initiative, which is really, we're kind of learning from that initiative about representing a democracy model and really looking at how that's how investment might fund working to build a future where entrepreneurs of color and their communities have the financial, social, and political power to create an equitable economy. And that kind of work isn't happening so far as a fund that's driven in Canada as far as we know. So we're experimenting with. And that's, I think I started to learn a little bit more about how to understand power in relationship and being cognizant of who and how I engage with people, and most importantly, where and how we can add value as a funder.
Perfect. Thank you,
Thank
Tracy.
you.
Jen, in your role as Director of Mission and Money with the Atkinson Foundation, a charitable foundation committed to social and economic justice, what are some of the vital values and principles that inform your grant making?
Thanks, Gigi. Hello, everybody. I'm based in Toronto, which are the treaty and lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people. Atkinson is based in Toronto, and our mandate is to fund charitable organizations, movement builders across the province. So we are a grant maker for sure, but we're also an advocate and an investor. And I would say that our values, we strive to make sure that our values cut across all three of those roles. We are somewhat unique in the landscape in that we have a mission. I've always had a mission for social and economic justice. And we know that that mission compels us to pursue racial justice. And I say that we're unique, not because others aren't pursuing those same goals, but for us, it's like baked into like our bylaws, which some days we think, how did they get away with that back in the day? But it allows us to play, I think, a really exciting role in the sector. Our namesake, Joseph Atkinson, was the editor and the publisher of the Toronto Star. He started our foundation with the idea humanity above all, and how that sort of translates to us in the day-to-day is that he believed, and we feel it is our responsibility to continue that forward. And when I say we, I mean the board and the staff of the foundation, that our work is about putting people first. So while we do fund, of course, charitable organizations, working in collaboration with other organizations and networks, we really do try to remember that it is people who do this work, and it should be the people most affected by the issues that are leading that work. And for us right now, our strategic priority is focused on strengthening movements for decent work and a fair economy. So we work a lot with worker-led organizations. The people who live in those communities not only have a benefit from that development, whether it's a new transit line or a hospital, but there are also democratic ways in which they can influence how that development takes place, and to ensure that people are not displaced as a result of changes to neighborhoods. So we really need to understand where our wealth has come from and work towards repairing our relationship with each other and the planet. Second is the value of equity. And we really think about that in terms of how we shift power. Joseph Atkinson, back in the day, often talked about when he was leaving his role, returning the paper to the people. And so we think about what does it mean to return the foundation and the wealth that the foundation has been able to create to people. And finally, the value of accompaniment. And this is, we're a smaller foundation. We're able to work alongside our partners over a longer period of time. And that means we can, really try to lean into those relationships, driven by the values of, or the principles, I guess, of respect, humility, and patience. And so really thinking about how much do we learn and internalize in the work that we do, as much as, and more so, frankly, than what we can say about this work to the world, to the sector, to the field. I would say that we generally don't think that we're in the best position to do that. But learning how to be in relationship and learning how to manage the power, the fact that we do have resources, the fact that we're not a democratically based organization, how do we put in the guardrails and infrastructure so that we're compensating for those realities, I think is something that we're always working to be better at.
Thank you, Jen. Artie, what is the ultimate goal of the Definity Insurance Foundation?
Yeah, interesting. And people have talked about it, but our ultimate goal is really to address the root self-help, social, economic, and climate inequalities. Like, we know we don't want to tinker at the edges. We really want to work collaboratively with others. We want to pool our resources together. We want to ensure the success of our partners who are addressing systems challenges. And, for us, when we think about grant making and how to do this, we understand we can't do this using a charitable model. So our values of community, integrity, and justice really means that we need to center the rights of communities. And this is what everyone's been talking about, like every speaker so far, about putting community first, or putting people first, or shifting power. But really it's about centering the rights of communities and not ignoring past realities that have forced communities into oppressive situations, because it's very easy to just, we're going to fund, we're going to fund stopgap measures. But if we don't put, as folks have said, you don't put the power back, or really they always had the power and maybe we took it away. I'm not really sure how that works, but really our population groups that we've identified, Black, Indigenous, racialized communities, women and youth, and the intersectionality of that is how we're going to ensure that the funding flows to the people that can make a difference and achieve the goals of equity.
Thank you. Michelle, currently in your role at the Community Foundation of Canada, can you share some of the important work you're facilitating, such as the Catalyst Community Finance Initiative?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I am calling in from same place as Tracy, actually, what's now called London, Ontario. Traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Nipewak people. And in my role connected to transformation at Community Foundations of Canada, we have been exploring the intersections that we've heard a little bit about here around equity, climate, and economy, and really trying to bring that systems lens to the work. And it is, tackling our most wicked problems at that at that root cause, and getting beyond those single mission or single issue areas, but how do we really transform systems for better futures? And that language of futures is important, because sometimes we say future without recognizing that there will be different futures depending on how we're kind of coming at that. And so in the space of systems innovation finance and gender equality, really excited to be working alongside others who are on this call with Catalyst Community Finance. And just if you think about community foundations as an example, there we have over 200 across the country, but then we have all sorts of other intermediaries that make up this ecosystem of place-based community finance, whether that's in urban areas, rural areas, northern communities. And so Catalyst is, on a mission to really galvanize and build that ecosystem, really centering equity, including the intersectionality of gender, race, Indigenous reconciliation, disability, LGBTQ2+. And so really looking at from that broad place and how can we facilitate the knowledge sharing, because so many times we're replicating things. We know that women and gender diverse people are, not necessarily always in these social finance impact investing spaces, getting the kind of support that others are. And so how are we really centering that in our work? So it's, still a fairly new initiative, and we're excited to really make sure that we're thinking about, the public policy infrastructure and how we can do that work. So for example, just last week, we had a convening that focused on how we engage the Black communities, but you could hear the threads of really understanding how that intersects with gender. And I think the place-based piece and the local piece is really important because, as we're engaging in this work, really understanding what those local needs are from really thinking at that participatory level and where those decisions are being made. And I know in some of my early work in the space of community finance, definitely was missing who's making those decisions, and in some ways we're replicating some of the patterns that have existed before. So I think kind of going back full circle to some of that transformation work, it's recognizing that there's a lot of learning and failure that's going to happen as part of this work, and how do we name that and honor that work. And I guess just to say that we're, as we build out this action plan, we think about we started in Ontario, but we're kind of trying to go across Canada and really think about how do we support those folks that are in these ecosystems and the intermediaries to really share, so that we're not having to replicate things. So for me, a feminist future needs to be embedded in everything that we're doing as we think about these better futures. And want to just do a quick shout out to Inda and Njoki, who have joined our team as Transformation Storytelling Fellows, who are here today. Excited that they're a part of this conversation as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Njeri, what are some of the systematic barriers in your work, if any, that you would like to see mitigated?
Yeah, we had to have one person do that today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question. And when I was thinking about this, as I think about it now, I just think, did I actually answer that question before? But I think about the work like we did with the consultant last year, because the consultant SETSI made us recognize our responsibility as funders, how we are and really how we really are contributing to those systemic inequalities, both in the way the wealth is accumulated and in the way that we are how the dissemination is controlled. So we find so what we really and who do we deem trustworthy or not, and really that has been a huge understanding. That has been one of the, I think, the biggest aha moments we've had this year, because we've been talking about as a group. We have a team of we're 5 of us that actually look at the responsive granting, because that's where we get a lot more of the reactive grants and not the proactive ones. And so what we did was that we looked at the process. The process was around, at the time they were only getting around 10,000, but we were making them complete a 12-page form. And so we started immediately easing the burden of the grantees in how they access the funding. Our form is now just 2 pages, and it's online. It's a pretty, we're using a new online granting portal that is really quite, the ease of applying has risen quite, it's actually quite highly risen, because I'm finding that we are actually getting double the number of applications coming in, because we've made it very easy for people to apply. And then when we talked about trust-based philanthropy, somebody said, how are you actually using it? And it's been more around when we see an application that you can tell the type of person that's applied, maybe has never applied for a grant before, or they are just really working from the side of their desk, putting as much as they can with the little time that they have. So what we do is we really, we don't go back to them and tell them, redo the application again. We call them, we have a conversation, and then that's pretty much enough for us to approve it. So and with that, and also we, in our application, we called it out and said, if you are Indigenous, Black, person of color, women, people living in low income, people with a disability, you will get first priority when you apply for this grants. That has actually brought people from really we would never have seen before, and very, very worthwhile causes. And yeah, so it's been an interesting way of, so there were so many barriers that we had for us as grantors and also as grantees. But I'm finding that the more we are working with people and really looking at the human side of it, the people side of it, and not making people go back and forth with applications, just picking up the phone and having a quick conversation and making a decision immediately has made a real difference in the way we are approaching the work.
SDC, you have engaged many communities on the margins of many ecosystems. How has that journey been for your team?
Very good question. So I think as many folks on the call do know, we're currently in the assessment and negotiation phase for the Social Finance Fund. So obviously I'm sharing what I can, but really, really eager, obviously, to start being able to share more with everyone. In terms of the process itself, throughout the design and thinking through the implementation, the Social Finance Fund adopted a social equity lens to really ensure that the capital that will be deployed through the Social Finance Fund does reach and support a wide range of underserved segments of the market. So specifically thinking through equity deserving communities. And so as part of that, it does include a minimum of $100 million, which is approximately 15% of the fund that will go towards investments that are promoting greater gender equality. But building on what's happening in general in the sector and thinking through the lens of intersectionality, we're actually exploring a wider social equity lens investment target to really go beyond gender and think through what does that mean for intersectionality and thinking through communities that are at the intersection of different identities, including gender. So the lens itself is really thinking at identifying and addressing systemic bias, encouraging decisions that remove barriers, but also ensuring that there is a diversity analysis that's incorporated throughout the process of whether it's still sourcing and once you get to capital allocation at the end, the deployment process, but not thinking just at the end, really thinking throughout the whole process. And it's been really a rewarding journey, just thinking through how to integrate a lot of those considerations. And obviously, a lot of folks on here have done a lot of work on what does that look like, and providing some recommendations and best practices. So thinking through those, and an example is power analysis, which obviously we're discussing today and is a big one, and thinking through what it means for the design and implementation of the fund. There's definitely a very strong desire to make sure that the fund does contribute to addressing systemic inequities in the traditional financial market and removes barriers between both the supply and demand of capital, again, thinking through equity deserving groups, but also organizations that serve them, so thinking through charities and nonprofits. And so just as we advance through this process, I think just really looking forward to continue building on a lot of the hard work that folks here and beyond have done, such as SETSI particularly as well, and just to really collectively think through what it means to address those systemic barriers in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Sally. Sagal, switching gears, Given that the foundation funds a range of women-led and serving organizations, specifically, what are some of the systematic barriers for the social purpose organizations or entrepreneurs that you work with, if any, that you would like to see mitigated?
And I apologize, I don't think I introduced myself in the beginning, but I am calling from Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and my name is Sigal Dwale. And the Canadian Women's Foundation is both a grant-making organization and advocacy organization. I think that's a really good question, because we do work with a diverse range of organizations, entrepreneurs, social purpose organizations, and there's systemic barriers that they face. But I think if I could answer a different question, because most of the organizations we work with are actually frontline service organizations. So they're gender-based violence organizations, hundreds and thousands of them across Canada. And the systemic barriers that they face are profound. And a lot of this has to be mitigated through different funding models. And so if I could, Gigi, I would kind of answer that question instead, just because the sheer size and the number and the work that we do.
Sure.
I think the first systemic barrier is to strengthen the core funding to women's organizations. And by women's organizations, and specifically what I mean is the organizations we work with are, those that are gender-based violence organizations, the shelters, the sexual assault centers, the transition homes, so they're not in a position of barely surviving, but they can actually thrive. And so part of the advocacy work that we've done is policy papers like Resetting Normal, that focuses on all of the kind of systemic barriers that need to be addressed so that recovery could happen. And it's clear that, many of the services that are offered by these organizations, like, safety, shelter, counseling, are all essential. But many of them are kind of struggling with the higher costs of shifting these services online, especially in the last couple of years, and just the sheer number of people that are accessing these services. And so I think the systemic barrier for me, from our perspective as Canadian Women's Foundation, the fact that, we're trying to end gender-based violence and support the organizations that are trying to end that, is that we have to face the terrifyingly cold, hard truth and facts about Canada when it comes to gender justice, and that we collectively kind of shrug off, which is that, sexual violence, for example, is the only violent crime in Canada that isn't declining. Every other violent crime in Canada is completely on the decline, except for sexual violence. And so why is that? Why are we so accepting of the fact that the overwhelming majority are women and gender diverse people when it comes to sexual violence? And so the aftermath and the cost of this in terms of funding is billions and billions of dollars in Canada. And so, and when we talk about systemic barriers from our perspective, I think, in terms of mitigation, the current funding model that we have is a full-blown deficit model, where women's organizations have to show kind of desperate needs, and the lack of funding in order to be even considered worthy of support and funding. Right. And so to compound that, I think they're not able to even put aside funds to shore up against future crises. And so, what we're really interested in is that we have to change this business as usual approach to funding that, this sector in particular. And, we want to learn what is happening. What are the different funding models and practices in other sectors, in other communities, and in other organizations? So I'm really excited and interested to learn what's happening with the panelists and those that are listening.